Hey everybody, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. Today's topic is RDOF and about 200 million or so that's ready to be authorized from the FCC. Be right back. Thanks for joining me, Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. And the FCC has announced 199 million or so in funds from RDOF, that's the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, that they're ready to authorize. So there's just a couple of small steps that those service providers have to do now to then be able to get their funding. So that's been announced. There are also some bid defaults that have been announced as part of that, and different announcement, but LTD Broadband unfortunately has been hit with a forfeiture that we're going to talk about as well. So let's take a look at what we have here. So first off, actually I was going to start here with the announcement. So I will link to the auction page here where you can download these files. There's the public notice, and there's attachment A and B. This would be the ones that are already authorized, and these are the defaults that are there. So I'm going to link to that. And when you download that public notice, it's a fairly long document you'll see here, so you can read through that. But so basically, there's some of their notes in here, some of the things that they talked about, specifically, one of the things that's very common in here, that the next two steps basically, or the paperwork that they need to send in now in order to be authorized, is they need to send in their letter of credit, and then a bankruptcy opinion notice, basically, or letter from somebody external that says, hey, if we go into bankruptcy, then that letter of credit won't be something that can be attached under that. So they just need to get those two pieces of paperwork filed, and then they're done and everything's authorized. So most likely these ready to authorized will be authorized here in a couple of weeks once the FCC gets all of that paperwork in, and then there'll be an announcement that these are authorized. It's possible that somebody won't go through that process, but if they're right here at the finish line, that would be very, very surprising. So you can read through this. Again, I'll post it. Now, what's interesting in here is it does, again, give some details on some things. And one of the bid defaulters, for example, was Conexon. Conexon is a company that works very closely with electric co-ops. They do a lot of the work, so they'll work with the electric co-op, get things set up, and as they go through that, they will do some of the services after the fact. And they've won quite a bit of money in bidding on this, but there were some defaults here. And what it mentions in this particular notice is that those defaults are related to not having approval from the tribal governments, or not having that set up properly or something like that. So that's what those were related to as far as those defaults. Then there is the list of winning bids, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but I did summarize this for you. So if you want to see a summary of who won, what, how much, how many census blocks, locations, etc., how much money, I'll go through a summary of that here in a minute. But you can just see how long this is. And as you go through it, each one of these is a census block group. And then you've got so many census blocks in a census block group. It might just be one. It could be 2, 3, 5, or more. Then you've got a bunch of locations. There's a certain number of locations in a census block group. That's going to vary anywhere from here. You got one census block group, one census block, and 3 locations. Here you've got one census block group, 5 census blocks, and 17 locations. And these are all right here, cable 1. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll down through here. So as you look, a bunch of them are cable 1 as I go down. There's Seabridge Telecom, Conexon, as I mentioned. They won a bunch here in Colorado, but they also had some bid defaults in Colorado that I'll look at here in a minute. And as I scroll down in here, there's one company called Mercury Wireless Indiana that bid in Indiana and several other states. Michigan, wow, a bunch in Michigan. There are other, again, I summarized this in a minute, but anyway, you can see, are you getting nauseous yet? So this is all that same company, all these census blocks and locations. So again, I'm not going to go through that whole list like that. I did summarize things. Then you've got your bid defaults. This I will look at because there's not that many. So you can see here, some of these are on the accepted, those that have been ready to authorize, like Seabridge, but there were some defaults that they had. Then again, I mentioned Conexon in Colorado, where they had some issues where they did not get full approval. Then there's this company, there's Plateau Telecommunications, just one location in New Mexico. Then there's a company, RHMD, And they were not on the approved list, so, but they have a bunch of defaults here, and it says they're in Georgia. I've not heard of them, and I Googled them and don't know who they are. When I Googled it, it came up as some kind of medical company. I don't know if that's different. A lot of these you'll see as LLC because they will set up a separate limited liability corporation a lot of times when they're doing this bidding in some cases, and that's why you'll see the LLCs in there. And then a few others in here. So these, you see a couple of Time Warner locations. They were not in the ready to authorize list this most recent time. Neither was Shenandoah, SafeLink. None of those were in there. But as I mentioned, Connexon was, as well as Seabridge. And now we'll look at that summary. So again, a summary. This is a summary of all of these ready to authorize. So this huge long document here, what I did was I took the time so you don't have to. I went through and I looked at how many locations and states and whatnot everybody got as far as what they're going to be getting from this. So you've got Cable One. Again, there were big winners on here, and you can see the states that they had auctioned or bid on here. And the way this works, just to kind of give a summary and kind of a review if you're not familiar with this. So the RDOF is a reverse auction. So each one of these operators were involved in an auction, and they submit bids in these various areas in these census block groups. And they were, it was a reverse auction that had a descending clock. So basically there would be a certain price set, and then everybody would bid underneath that to say, we can do it for this little. And then somebody else might bid, oh, I can do it for this little. And I don't think they knew necessarily what other people were bidding. They didn't, but as the clock went down, they would adjust their bids. And eventually they got to a price where everybody was set. And so basically you won, determined your winning bid was determined by how little you would accept, how little support you would accept. And you can see it varies when we talk about the amount per location that some of these places got. So again, this is where Cable One bid. They bid on 139 census groups that made up 484 census blocks. And total locations in those census blocks was 1,425. They won $3,548,000 approximately, and the average amount per location for them was $24.90. And this is over 10 years. So when you see these amounts, this $3.5 million is over 10 years. So this $2,490, they get that per location over 10 years. So that helps defray the costs of building out this infrastructure. So you can see they did pretty good, about $2,500. Then you got Seabridge, and we saw that they had a couple of bid defaults. But they did bid in these 3 states. They won 31 census block groups. That's 333 census blocks, so about almost 4,500 locations that they got. And they're going to get $775,000, or about $173 per location. So you can see a big difference there. That difference could be related to either the number of people that were bidding in those rounds for these particular locations. There might have been several people in there and you had to kind of lowball to be able to win it. It could be that if the amount was higher, that it's possible that it was a high cost area, because in a high cost areas you could get more per location. Or maybe there weren't many bidders in some locations for some of these higher amounts, and somebody just bid on that. They happened to be there and one of the few bidders in there and got it at a higher price. So we don't know. I don't know what the difference is, but you know, it's interesting with Seabridge, for example, and Connexon having some defaults, especially with Seabridge having, you know, a lower amount that they won. The default amount is $3,000 per census block group. So in Seabridge's particular case, that would be 31 times $3,000 per census block group that they would be fined for these bid defaults that I showed you a minute ago. So that's significant. And I don't think that the FCC waives that. I didn't see anything. For Connexon, they said, no, you've defaulted for these particular reasons, I know. So, you know, Connexon had some as well. So again, $3,000 per census block group is what what the forfeiture is, or the fine that they have to pay. So you got Seabridge, you got Connexon, you see 77 locations, about 15, or excuse me, census block groups, about 15,371 exactly. Locations that they got, $40 million, about $2,600 per location. Docomo Pacific Inc., this is interesting. This is the first time I've seen this, although I haven't checked every single one of these, but these guys are in the Northern Mariana Islands. So this is a territory, and I guess they have census blocks and census block groups and territories, because they won 7. or 530 locations, and they're going to be getting close to $7,000 in support. Again, it may be because these are high-cost areas, and it also may be that they were the only ones bidding in this area, so they didn't have to drop their price. They just basically bid, and maybe they got their higher price there. Because again, this is you're not going to have a lot of people bidding there in the Northern Mariana Islands. Farmers Rural Connect, Arkansas, 6 census block groups, about 419 locations, about 3,000 that they got per location. Fidelity Cablevision in Missouri, they're getting about $1,000 per location. That's for 43 locations. Gordonville Cooperative Telephone Association, Minnesota, only 2 census block groups, 24 locations, but they're getting about $2,600 per location. So that's around the average, which is, if somebody's getting 2,500 or so, they're doing well. It's around the average. Let's see, Hawkins Information Technology in California. They are basically 3,700 locations, $583, so much lower there. California, they're probably more bidders and maybe less rural, possibly. Hunter Communications, California, Oregon. Let's see, $3,325 per location. That's for 5,758 locations. Innovative Financial in Texas, only $104 per location. So they bid on 31 census blocks. They won census block groups. They won 842 census blocks out of that. 2,732 locations, but only $104. I think that was the least, if I remember. We'll see here. Innovative Financial in Texas. Innovative Financial in Texas was $104. Okay. So that was what I was just looking at. So Hunter, California, Oregon, actually they did pretty good, 3,300. And you can see MEI Telecom, you see Mercury Wireless. This is the one that had so many on there. So they bid in Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Kansas, Missouri. 17, so these guys were by far the biggest on this round, 1,739 census block groups. Excuse me, almost 20,000 census blocks, 167,000 plus locations, and they're getting $407 per location. So that's an awful lot of work they're going to have to do, getting an average of $407 per location. So we'll see how they do with that. You got Miles here, Miles Communications in Iowa, about 2,900 per location. These guys did well. MLGC, not sure who that is, in North Dakota. 9 census block groups, 635 locations, and you had about $7,100 approximately. Pair Networks in Vermont, $1,600 approximately per location. Where did that go? There it is, Pair. Then you got Quest, 11 census block groups they bid on, about 2,400 or so locations, and then $3,800 per location, so they did well. Silver Star Telephone in Wyoming, 609 locations, 3,339 per location. TCA Communications in Arkansas, only $111 per location, so they've been on 9 census block groups, 528 locations. Then you got Tom Bigby Electric. It's a electric cooperative in Alabama, really good guys down there. They've been working with fiber a really long time, and they've gone out and got some RDOF dollars. I've seen them on the list before as far as ready to be authorized. So 72 census block groups, about 10,000 plus, 10,310 locations, and $726 per location. So not a lot for them on those. United Telephone Company of Pennsylvania did well, $3,800 per location. And Whisper ISP, 61 census block groups, 1,281 locations, and $952 per location. Then you got Youngstown Television in Pennsylvania, about $1,100 per. And you can see down here, this all adds up to the almost $200 million that they're awarding. You can see the average, when I just average all these numbers, about $2,300. Obviously, there's a big delta between the highest and the lowest, but it does seem to come in around, quite often around this number when you're looking at the averages on these. And you know, one other thing about this Mercury Wireless that bid so much in here, a lot of the folks that were wireless came out because almost everybody bid in the gigabit tier. So you had different tiers you could bid. You could do, gigabit was the the one that had basically zero weight. If you did gigabit, low latency, there was no weight on your bid, which means that you didn't have anything dragging you down. Or if you said you were going to do a slower speed and maybe higher latency, then the weight was higher, and that affected your bid. So a lot of people, almost everybody who won, bid in the gigabit area. And wireless operators, some of them have come out and said, well, you know what, we're going to do fiber in lots of areas. We'll still do wireless in some areas, but we're going to do fiber in others. Some are saying we're going to do fiber most of the way and do wireless just at the last mile. So I'm not sure what their plan is, but they've got lots of locations and not a lot of money. So I would not be surprised if they are doing maybe something like 5G. Maybe they're doing CBRS to get some mid-band spectrum. I don't know if there would be licensing spectrum with that kind of amount per location, but that could be what they're doing. But again, a lot of them have said we're going to do as much fiber as we can, and then you set up your cell towers, and then you can do wireless from there. I don't think they'd be doing millimeter wave. I doubt that, because this is all rural, and that's not going to work well in a rural area. So maybe doing 5G, and that may be why $407 will be enough to cover them, because they don't have to do the last mile infrastructure via something like fiber. They can do with wireless. One other thing I want to talk about, which is this this fine here for LTD Broadband. LTD was actually the largest RDOF winner in the auction, and they've so far have gotten no money. They've not been announced that they've won anything. They've had, I remember seeing, I think, a bunch of defaults for them, and now they've been fined $100,000 for prohibited communications. So once service providers submitted their short form application, once that short form application was in and the auction was getting started, they were not supposed to communicate with anybody. They were supposed to go into a quiet period until the auction was over. And apparently what happened here with them was they were working with a financing company to try to get some financing set up. And I think that financing company contacted Cox Communication, which was another bidder in there. And through some of that communication, it became known, I think, some of the details became known about what LTD was bidding on. I don't know if maybe they could make a determination of how much. And so that was not supposed to be done, and it was never disclosed. So they've been fined $100,000, which is this was the standard fine if something like that happened. I don't think Cox was fined, probably because they were not really aware of what was going on so much about the fact that this was privileged communication coming from the other direction. But I'll also post a link to this, and then you can download the specifics on this, which goes through this particular forfeiture. So again, that'd be $100,000 that LTD Broadband will need to pay because of getting involved in this privileged communication during that quiet period. So RDOF continues. We've got coming up this month, we'll have the Notice of Funding Opportunity for the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That's coming up. But a lot of activity is still going on with American Rescue Plan Act money for broadband, and then RDOF money. So all of these areas are going to start to be getting money and being built out before the IIJA funds ever become available, because that's still got a ways to go before we can start getting those funds out to the service providers. That's going to be like early next year, probably, before the money starts to flow on that. So a lot of these areas right now that are unserved or underserved will be served from this RDOF money. So I would imagine that all of these areas are going to be considered or not going to be on the map when the final FCC broadband map comes out later this year. Service providers are going to be submitting their, starting in June, they're going to be submitting where they have coverage, and I would imagine where they're planning on doing coverage if they have federal funds coming. So some of these people that are winning all of these awards that are going to be building out, they want to make sure that that information gets on the FCC map. So I would imagine that the FCC maps will reflect RDOF awards that have been approved. And again, these are ready to be authorized, but they will be authorized probably in 2 to 3 weeks. So we'll see a notice about that at that point. And I don't expect really probably any changes from that. So thanks for joining me. If this was helpful for you, give me a like on the video. And if you're not subscribed to our broadcast to YouTube, go ahead and click the subscribe button. Click the bell and you'll be notified when I'm live. And I will see you next time. That will be tomorrow for broadband deployment news. Take care. Bye-bye.